Silent Hill 2 is in my opinion the greatest game of all time. It transcends its medium of video game and approaches something of a masterwork of artistry. Silent Hill 2 was created by Japanese game developers Team Silent, a production group within Konami Computer Entertainment Tokyo. Released in 2001, Silent Hill 2 centres around the protagonist James Sunderland, who revisits the town after receiving a letter written by his deceased wife. The letter states she's waiting for him in their special place in Silent Hill. Gameplay places a greater emphasis on finding items and solving riddles than all-out combat. Psychological aspects such as the gradual disappearance of Mary's letter were added to the game in order to disconcert and unnerve the player. Some of the monsters were designed as a reflection of James's subconscious. References to real-world history, film and literary works can also be found within the game. Upon its release, Silent Hill 2 was received with overwhelming critical acclaim. English-language critics praised the atmosphere, the graphics, story, and monster designs, but criticised the controls as they were difficult to use. While not a direct sequel to the events and characters of the first Silent Hill game, Silent Hill 2 takes place in the series' namesake town, located in the northeastern United States. The town draws upon the psyche of its visitors, and ultimately forms alternative visions of the town, which differ depending upon the character. The concept behind the town was a small rural town in America. Development of Silent Hill 2 started in June 1999, directly after the completion of its predecessor. The story was conceived by CGI director Takayoshi Sato, who based it on Russian author Fyodor Dostoevsky's novel Crime and Punishment, a story in which the focus is on the mental anguish and moral dilemmas of Rodin Raskolnikov, an impoverished ex-student in St. Petersburg who formulates and executes a plan to kill an unscrupulous pawnbroker for her cash. He attempts to defend his actions and argues that with the pawnbroker's money he could perform good deeds to counterbalance the crime, whilst ridding the world of a vermin. The decision to produce a sequel to Silent Hill was partly a financial one, as it had been commercially successful, and partly a creative one, as the team had faced difficulties while working on the game. The team were given a small window to settle on a platform, and could not gather information on the then unannounced GameCube and the Xbox consoles, which led them to begin production on a game for the PlayStation 2. The GameCube version that was originally envisaged was scrapped due to concern that the market would become saturated. A total of around 50 people worked on the game. While a creative team from the first game remained, they had to bring in around 30 people from Konami. As the developers already had a rough sense of the game's environment, they focused on the game's plot first, in contrast to the previous game. The hardware of the PlayStation 2 allowed the characters to create improved fog and shadow special effects. For example, as a monster approaches the character, its shadow cast on the wall by the flashlight grows. When dealing with the camera angles of this game, the team struggled with a balance between those that stayed true to the creative vision and those that did not hamper gameplay. The team wanted Silent Hill 2's protagonist to reflect the evil against which the protagonist of the first game battled. The monsters in the game, as well as being more humanoid in design than their counterparts in the preceding Silent Hill game, are acknowledged to have been for the most part designed as a reflection of James's own subconscious. The nurses are among the most iconic creatures from Silent Hill 2. Although the nurses were in the original Silent Hill, the look of the nurses in the second game is what carried over into future adaptations. The nurses, like most of the minor creatures, are representative of James's sexual frustration. The nurses wear low-cut blouses that further emphasise their sexual nature. They also twitch, which could be attributed to the anxiety James feels over his sexual frustrations due to the sexual deprivation associated with Mary's illness. The fact they are nurses, figures associated with hospitals and health, is also an association with Mary's illness. Maria is a manifestation of James's late wife, Mary Shepherd Sunderland. All of her physical features are identical to Mary, except her appearance is more sexual. Her personality is also more extroverted and sexually promiscuous than Mary. Maria was manifested by James in order to fulfill his need to see Mary again, but also to fulfill James's wish of what he wanted Mary to be. Maria also appears to have some of Mary's memories, evident when she taunts James from the jail cell, which further suggests she's a manifestation. Pyramid Head is probably the most iconic creature from Silent Hill 2, and perhaps the series in general. Pyramid Head is an executioner who is manifested by James's need to be punished for his crimes, since James had not come to accept his role in Mary's death. Pyramid Head reminds James of his crimes by constantly killing Maria, a manifestation of Mary, in front of James. Pyramid Head's main goal is to lead James to the truth, and once James accepts his crime, Pyramid Head commits suicide by stabbing himself with a great spear. As well as creatures reflecting his subconscious, as does the environment. For example, the corpse sitting in front of the distorted television set in the apartments is the same character model as James Sunderland. The clothes, the body structure, and the face are all the same. The camera is designed so that the player cannot see this, however. Other acknowledged attempts to induce a psychological influence of the game include placing Mary's dress in the room where James discovers the flashlight. The town of Silent Hill itself is a representation of a person's personal demons. This is evident in all of the games, as each character has their own version of the Otherworld. The Otherworld is a representation of a character's psyche and constitutes their own personal nightmare. The Otherworld's appearance changes depending on a character's personal demons. Eddie's Otherworld is similar to the Freezer. It's cold and dark with hanging bodies. Angela's Otherworld is sexual in nature, evidenced by its flesh-covered walls. This is a direct reference to Angela's sexual abuse at the hands of her father and brother. Her otherworld also has elements of fire. This is a manifestation of Angela's psychological feelings that she was in a living hell due to her past abuse. James's otherworld is dark and depressing, with an overall gloomy atmosphere. The streets and halls are initially deserted in the earlier exploration of the otherworld, but as the game progresses, the creatures appear more frequently and become harder to kill. This is symbolic of James's mind trying to prevent him from discovering the truth. Gurneys appear regardless of the situation, and many beds are covered with white sheets and pillows. This represents Mary's illness and subsequent death due to asphyxiation with a white pillow. For the art style of the game, the team drew on a variety of influences. The work from film directors David Cronenberg, David Fincher, David Lynch and Alfred Hitchcock, along with films similar to the 1990 psychological thriller horror film Jacob's Ladder, and painters such as Francis Bacon, Rembrandt and Andrew Wyeth. Early in the project, they studied the 1996 video game Tomb Raider's creation of 3D environments. Other influences on the game include the 1992 survival horror video game Alone in the Dark, the first Silent Hill game, and the Japanese comic Work. The Blue Creek apartment building in Silent Hill is a reference to the film Blue Velvet. Blue for the movie's title, and creek as a synonym for river, for the deep river apartments seen in the film. The apartments in the game are very similar to the look and overall layout of the deep river apartments in the David Lynch film. The streets and buildings were inspired and named after real writers, stories, and locations. Akira Yamaoka composed the music of Silent Hill 2 at his home. Yamaoka took 3 days to write the music for the theme of Laura, the main theme in Silent Hill 2, by combining a sad melody and a strong beat, although he does not consider a melody to be the most important element of a music piece. Silent Hill 2 makes extensive use of sound effects, ranging from screams to footsteps on broken glass. Yamaoka wanted to surprise the player with different sounds and create an unsettling environment. He also incorporated occasional silence, commenting that selecting moments of silence is another way of producing sound. Many of the ambient sounds in the game are random, meaning the sound design tends to be different each playthrough. For example, there are random chances of the player hearing footsteps, whispering, glass shattering, breathing, crying, screaming, and a pig squealing. The final version of the game has a total of 6 possible endings, 3 of which can be achieved on the first playthrough, and 3 others are enabled by acquiring new items on the replays. The leave ending. The woman in the room is Maria once again, making a final attempt to get James to take her. James rebuffs her, however. She turns into a monster similar to the hanging monsters in the hospital, becoming the final boss. Upon her defeat, James is granted a final meeting with Mary, who gives him her letter. James leaves Silent Hill together with Laura. In water. The woman in the room is Maria once again, making a final attempt to get James to take her. James rebuffs her, however. She turns into a monster similar to the hanging monsters in the hospital, becoming the final boss. Upon her defeat, James is granted a final meeting with Mary, but Mary dies again. James then drowns himself by driving into Toluca Lake with his wife's corpse so that they can be together in death. Maria. If the player spends a lot of time with Maria and protects her well from the monsters, including Pyramid Head in the hospital basement, the woman in the room will be Mary, who has not forgiven James for killing her. She will then turn into the final boss, and after her defeat, James dismisses her as being just another hallucination. He then discovers Maria, inexplicably resurrected again, and leaves town with her. As they leave, however, Maria starts coughing, implying she is suffering from the same illness as Mary. Rebirth. James kills Maria. He then rows a boat with his wife's corpse to the Church of Rebirth on Toluca Lake Island, to use new objects collected in the game to resurrect Mary by confronting the old gods of Silent Hill, with an unknown result. Alongside the dramatic endings, there are also 2 bizarre comical endings. The dog ending. In the hotel, James discovers a dog, who has apparently been controlling all of the events of the game from a large, cartoony computer console beyond a locked door. The UFO ending. This ending is a continuation of the UFO ending of the first game, added in the re-release version in which James is abducted by a group of aliens with the help of the first game's protagonist, Harry Mason. Cat theory. At least 2 or 3 times during the game we can see Laura drawing images of a cat. In ancient Rome, the cat was seen as a guardian of the home and symbolised a domestic goddess. In Laura's case, this is exactly the thing she longs for. Being stuck in the sick ward of the hospital, she craves what every young child does: a normal home and family. Trunk theory. Throughout the game we are presented with 3 different possibilities on when Mary really died. At the beginning, he says she died 3 years ago, but could this be another delusion? Later in the game we see a letter from Mary wishing Laura a happy birthday. Laura says her birthday was last week. Could it be that Mary's actually died within a week? Let's take this one step further. What is James doing at the beginning of the game? He's in a rest stop bathroom, seemingly splashing his face with water in a sink. Could it be that he has just finished killing Mary before that? Could she be in the trunk of his car? In one ending we see James pick up Mary's lifeless body and carry her out of the room. He then drives his car into the lake. Could it be that this is what James had meant to do in the first place? In Silent Hill 2, holes, including vertical corridors and long downward staircases, appear repeatedly upon and after James's arrival beneath the Historical Society. James falls through these holes many times over as if lured by something. One can think that these holes symbolise the abyss which has opened up in his heart. By means of falling through these holes, James dives into his own subconscious and finally comes to accept the crime he has committed. As with the scrawled words at the bar, it seems that in the town of Silent Hill, holes open up here and there and lure those who hold darkness in their hearts. Perhaps holes are entrances to the abyss of the heart, seen only by those who bear the weight of their misdeeds. Holes may also represent James not being able to have intercourse with Mary. Silent Hill 2 is today considered by many to be the greatest horror game of all time, due to its story, use of metaphors, psychological horror, and taboo topics. It has received praise from video game journalists at the time of its release, and in retrospect. In a retrospective article on the survival horror genre, IGN writer Jim Sterling praised the game's plot as one of the finest examples of narrative construction in gaming to this day. Online game critic for the Escapist magazine, Benny Artie Croshaw, lists the game among his top 5 games of all time, praising the game for its thick and unsettling atmosphere, creating tension and fear for players. In his review of the game, he commented, "Silent Hill 2 is the game I replay every now and again, to remind myself, for all the shiny brown quick-time RPG element Space Marines, gaming is still worth defending." And that, it's a fascinating voyage of pain and despair that leaves you emotionally drained and satisfied. Silent Hill 2 is ranked first on X-Play's list of the scariest games of all time in 2006. IGN lists it as one of the 5 best horror video games created after 2000 in 2009, and one of the 12 greatest PlayStation 2 games of all time. In 2008, Games Radar placed it on its 15 best video game stories ever, describing it as a punishing tale not easily matched. In 2009, Wired News listed it as the 11th most influential game of the decade, for its emphasis on psychological horror and exploration of taboo topics, such as incest and domestic abuse, rather than gore. In 2012, the game's narrative was ranked first on Games Radar's list of the best video game stories ever. More recently, Silent Hill 2 was listed as number 2 top horror games of all time in the October 2014 issue of Game Informer. Silent Hill 2 showcased that games can be narrative art. It applies symbolism in order to enhance the narrative arc. The game itself catapulted psychological horror into the mainstream and showed that the horror genre doesn't have to be defined by jump scares. Even the rival series Resident Evil almost followed in the path of Silent Hill after Silent Hill 2's success. The prototype of Resident Evil 4, known as Resident Evil 3.5, featured fog worlds, illusions and hallucination. The man behind Resident Evil 4, Shinji Mikami, later created The Evil Within, a game which is heavily influenced by Silent Hill 2. This is noticeable in the art design, as well as the psychological themes found within the game. The acclaim awarded to Silent Hill 2 is not because of the gameplay, but because of the narrative and willingness to tackle unpleasant topics. The plotline may be simple, but it is realised in a complex and intriguing way. Modern games such as Red Dead Redemption and The Last of Us also take the approach of enhancing a simple plot. Unsurprisingly, these games also receive critical and fan acclaim. Silent Hill 2 opened up a new path in video game narrative back in 2001, and even today, the tale of James Sunderland is held in very high regard.